The U.S. horizon hummed with activity as the crew prepared for their next mission. Sleek and imposing, the vessel represented humanity's finest technological achievement in deep space exploration. On the loading dock, Captain Laura Maxwell watched with arms crossed as the last of the supplies and personnel boarded. "Final specialist arriving now, Captain," First Officer Greg Porter announced. Consulting his tablet, Captain Maxwell nodded. "The xenobiologist from Earth Science Division, correct?" "Yes, ma'am." "Dr. Samuel Freeman. His file says he's the leading expert on non-terrestrial biology." The shuttle door opened, and both officers straightened, expecting someone who matched the impressive credentials they'd reviewed. Instead, a thin man with rumpled clothes and wild gray-streaked hair stumbled out, dropping a case of equipment that scattered across the deck. "Oh dear, I'm so sorry," the man muttered, scrambling to collect his belongings. Porter raised an eyebrow. "That's our expert." Maxwell sighed. "Apparently so." Dr. Freeman, Doc, as his previous colleagues called him, finally gathered his things and approached with an awkward smile. "Captain Maxwell." Dr. Samuel Freeman reporting for duty. His handshake was limp, his voice barely audible over the ambient noise of the dock. Maxwell returned the greeting with professional courtesy, but her doubt was evident in her expression. "Welcome aboard, Doctor. We've prepared lab space according to your specifications." "Thank you, Captain. I'm excited to join this mission. The possibility of encountering new life forms is, well, it's why I became a xenobiologist." As they walked through the ship's corridors, crew members glanced at Doc with expressions ranging from curiosity to dismissal. His lab coat was stained with what looked like coffee, and he kept stopping to adjust his glasses or jot notes in a small paper notebook, an antique habit in an age of digital everything. "The Epsilon sector has shown promising signs of intelligent life," Maxwell explained as they walked. "If we make contact, your expertise will be valuable." Doc nodded enthusiastically. "I studied the preliminary data. Fascinating atmospheric compositions on several planets. Suggests respiration mechanisms unlike anything we've cataloged." His eyes lit up as he spoke about science, the only time he seemed truly comfortable. Lieutenant Mason, the security chief, joined them midway through the tour. His muscular frame and confident stride contrasted sharply with Doc's stooped posture. "So this is our new science guy?" Mason asked, not bothering to hide his skepticism. "Dr. Freeman is the leading xenobiologist in his field," Maxwell replied firmly. Mason looked unconvinced. "No offense, Doctor, but we might encounter hostile species out there. Can you handle yourself in a crisis?" Doc blinked several times before answering. Well, I completed the standard emergency training course." Mason snorted. "Great. Just stay in your lab when things get dangerous, okay?" Later that evening, Doc sat alone in his new laboratory, carefully unpacking equipment that represented years of his research. The walls were lined with specimens and data screens. This was his domain, where he understood everything, where everything made sense. Outside the lab, he heard crew members laughing as they passed by. "Did you see the new science officer? Looks like he'd faint at the sight of his own shadow." "Yeah, Captain's just bringing him because regulations require a specialist." Doc's hands paused briefly over a delicate instrument, but his expression remained neutral. He'd heard similar comments throughout his career. They didn't know that behind his quiet exterior lay a mind that noticed everything, processed constantly, and never forgot a detail. He simply returned to his work, organizing his lab with methodical precision. The mission would launch tomorrow, and whatever awaited them in deep space, Doc would be ready, whether the crew believed it or not. 3 weeks into their mission, the U.S. horizon entered an uncharted star system. The bridge buzzed with excitement as sensors detected an artificial structure orbiting the fourth planet. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission," Communications Officer Allison Reed announced, her fingers dancing across her console. Captain Maxwell straightened in her chair. "Put it on screen." The view screen flickered, revealing a tall reptilian being with iridescent scales and 4 yellow eyes. Its muscular body was adorned with metallic ornaments that seemed to indicate rank. "I am Vexkar, commander of the Vecnar Defense Fleet," the alien announced in a deep, resonant voice. The ship's translation matrix worked flawlessly. "Identify yourselves and your purpose in our territory." "I am Captain Laura Maxwell of the Earth vessel U.S. Horizon. We are on a peaceful mission of exploration and seek diplomatic relations." The alien studied them with unblinking eyes. "We will permit your delegation to board our command ship for evaluation. No more than 5 representatives." After the transmission ended, Maxwell assembled her team. Herself, First Officer Porter, Security Chief Mason, Communications Officer Reed, and reluctantly, Doc Freeman. "Doctor, we need your expertise on alien biology," she explained. "But please, let us handle the talking." Doc nodded, clutching his scientific scanner. "Of course, Captain. I'm just here to observe." The team boarded a shuttle and docked with the massive Vecnar vessel. They were escorted through corridors lined with armed guards to a grand chamber where 3 Vecnar leaders waited on elevated platforms. The aliens immediately approached Mason and Porter, examining their uniforms and weapons with interest. They circled Captain Maxwell, noting her command insignia with approving nods. When they reached Doc, who stood quietly scanning with his device, their demeanor changed. "What is this small one doing?" asked one Vecnar, towering over Doc. "This is our science specialist, Dr. Freeman," Maxwell explained. The 3 Vecnar exchanged glances, then erupted in a sound that the humans' translators identified as laughter. "You bring a knowledge keeper to first contact." The lead Vecnar's voice dripped with mockery. "On our world, such weak ones remain in learning chambers, not among warriors and leaders." Doc continued his scans, seemingly unaffected by their ridicule. A Vecnar snatched his scanner away, examining it with contempt. "Primitive tools for a primitive species. Please return that equipment," Maxwell said firmly. The alien tossed the device back to Doc, who fumbled but managed to catch it. "Your scientist trembles like prey," another Vecnar observed, causing more laughter. Throughout the meeting, the aliens directed all questions to Maxwell, Porter, and Mason, completely ignoring Doc's presence except to occasionally mock his quiet note-taking or scanning. When Doc attempted to ask about their biology, a Vecnar commander cut him off with a dismissive gesture. "We do not discuss such matters with non-warriors. Address your questions through your captain." Despite the insults, Doc continued his work silently, his eyes missing nothing. He noticed the Vecnar's sensitivity to certain light frequencies when they winced at his scanner's beam. He observed their breathing patterns changed near specific ship emissions. He catalogued the hierarchical displays that seemed instinctual rather than learned. As the delegation prepared to return to their shuttle, Doc lagged behind, seemingly distracted by a wall display. The Vecnar guards hardly paid him attention as he took readings of the ship's atmospheric composition. "Doctor, keep up," Porter called impatiently. Back aboard the Horizon, the team gathered to discuss the meeting. "They're militaristic, arrogant, and clearly view us as inferior," Mason summarized. Maxwell nodded, "but they've agreed to continue discussions tomorrow." Doc spoke up quietly. "Captain, I noticed several concerning things about their behavior and technology." Mason rolled his eyes. "Like what?" "How they laughed at you the whole time." "No," Doc replied, unfazed. "Like how they're scanning our ship's weapon systems while pretending to conduct diplomatic talks." The room fell silent as everyone turned to him in surprise. The morning meeting to discuss Doc's concerns never happened. At 400 hours, the U.S. Horizon shuddered violently, throwing crew members from their beds as emergency lights flashed red throughout the ship. Captain Maxwell rushed to the bridge, still pulling on her uniform jacket. "Status report." "All systems failing, Captain," Porter reported, his face illuminated by the dim emergency lighting. "Main power, weapons, engines, everything's shutting down one by one." On the view screen, 3 massive Vecnar warships surrounded them, their weapons primed and ready. "They've deployed some kind of energy field," the tactical officer explained. "It's disrupting our systems from the inside out." Maxwell slammed her fist on the console. "Open a channel." The lead Vecnar commander appeared, his yellow eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Captain Maxwell, your vessel is now under our control." "This is an act of war," Maxwell stated firmly. "We came in peace." "Peace," the commander laughed. "Weak species speak of peace. The strong take what they want. Your ship contains technologies we find useful. Your crew will be detained while we extract them." Before Maxwell could respond, the transmission cut off. Moments later, the bridge doors slid open, revealing a dozen heavily armed Vecnar soldiers. Throughout the ship, similar scenes unfolded as boarding parties rounded up crew members. The aliens moved with practiced efficiency, separating officers from enlisted personnel and civilians. Doc had been in his lab when the attack began. He quickly tucked several small devices into his pockets and hid his personal tablet in his boot before the doors burst open. 2 Vecnar soldiers entered, weapons raised. One scanned him with a handheld device. "No weapons," the soldier reported, then looked at Doc with contempt. "Just another knowledge keeper." They roughly pushed him from his lab and herded him with other scientists and support staff toward the cargo bay. As they passed through engineering, Doc noticed the Vecnar had installed strange crystalline devices on the main power conduits. In the cargo bay, nearly 100 crew members were being sorted into groups. The officers, including Captain Maxwell and her senior staff, were bound with energy restraints and placed under heavy guard. "The leaders and warriors will be interrogated," announced a Vecnar officer. "The rest will be held here until we determine your usefulness." Doc found himself pushed into the non-threat group, comprised mostly of science staff, medical personnel, and technicians. The Vecnar barely glanced at them after the initial sorting. From his position against the wall, Doc could see Captain Maxwell and the others being questioned. Mason attempted resistance and received a brutal strike that left him bleeding on the floor. "Your military ranks are obvious," the Vecnar commander said to Maxwell. "But we need to know which of your crew have knowledge of the ship's defensive capabilities and propulsion systems." Maxwell remained silent, her face a mask of defiance. The commander stepped closer. "Your silence only prolongs the inevitable. We will strip your vessel for its technology, with or without your cooperation." A young engineer near Doc whispered, "What are we going to do?" Doc quietly replied, "Watch, listen, wait." Throughout the day, the Vecnar continued their work. They brought in equipment, removed components from the ship's systems, and occasionally took crew members for questioning. Officers were kept isolated under constant guard, but the non-threats were largely ignored, allowed to sit together with minimal supervision. This was their mistake. Doc slowly began to whisper to those around him, asking specific questions about ship systems and crew specialties. His unassuming manner made the Vecnar guards take no notice of him. They saw only what they expected, a frightened scientist of no consequence. As night cycle approached, Doc had quietly taken stock of every available resource. Which crew members had what skills, what access the Vecnar had to different ship systems, and most importantly, where they remained vulnerable. When a guard shoved a container of ration packs toward the detainees, Doc volunteered to distribute them. As he moved among the crew, he whispered brief instructions to key personnel. The Vecnar noticed nothing unusual, just the weak knowledge keeper they had laughed at, now serving food to his equally insignificant companions. They would not be laughing much longer. 3 days into the Vecnar occupation, a pattern had emerged. The aliens worked in strict shifts, changing guards and technical teams at precise intervals. They kept the ship's officers isolated in the bridge and conference rooms, while the non-threats were allowed limited movement between the cargo bay and mess hall under guard. Doc had spent these days in near silence, watching everything with his keen scientific eye. The crew had begun to look to him for guidance. his calm demeanor providing reassurance in their captivity. During a meal period, Nurse Ellen Fowler slid onto the bench beside Doc, her movements casual. "The captain and other officers are being interrogated about weapon systems," she whispered, spooning the bland ration into her mouth. "Mason looks bad. They're not feeding them much." Doc nodded slightly, eyes on his tray. "What about the Vecnar? Any medical observations?" "They drink constantly. Some kind of electrolyte solution. Their scales dry out in our ship's atmosphere." This confirmed what Doc had already suspected from his initial scans. He tucked the information away, adding another piece to the puzzle forming in his mind. Later, as they were escorted back to the cargo bay, Doc stumbled slightly, bumping into a Vecnar guard. The alien shoved him roughly against the wall. "Watch yourself, small one," the guard hissed. "Sorry, so sorry," Doc mumbled, appearing frightened. What the guard didn't notice was Doc's hand briefly touching the alien's equipment belt, or the small sample of scale cells he'd managed to collect on his fingertips. Back in the cargo bay, Doc moved to a corner where engineering technician Paul Garcia waited. "What did you learn?" Doc asked quietly. "They've integrated their crystalline technology with our power systems," Garcia explained. "It's impressive but creates vulnerabilities. The crystals resonate at specific frequencies, could be disrupted with the right harmonic." Doc nodded thoughtfully. "And the communication system? They've taken over our internal comms, but they don't understand the backup system that runs through the maintenance tunnels. It's old tech, analog. They dismissed it as primitive." Around midnight, when most captives were sleeping, Doc carefully removed his hidden tablet from his boot. The Vecnar had confiscated all obvious technology, but had overlooked his small personal device, considering it insignificant. Using data from his earlier scans and the scale sample, Doc began analyzing Vecnar biology. Hours passed as he worked silently, occasionally jotting notes in a code of his own creation. By morning, he had confirmed his theory. The Vecnar respiratory system was highly specialized, adapted to filter specific toxins on their homeworld, but vulnerable to certain compounds the humans could tolerate. Doc slipped his tablet away as a guard approached. The alien kicked at several sleeping crew members. "Up. Work detail." 10 crew members, including Doc, were selected to clean areas of the ship where the Vecnar had set up operations. This was the opportunity he'd been waiting for. As they cleaned the science lab adjacent to his own, Doc noted the equipment the aliens had brought aboard. Their technology was advanced, but followed predictable patterns. Most importantly, he observed how they interfaced their systems with the ship's environmental controls. During a moment when the guards were distracted, communications specialist Rachel Wilson whispered to Doc, "I've been watching their transmission patterns. They send status reports to their main ship every 4 hours, precisely." Doc nodded. Their society values precision and routine. They consider it a strength. But it makes them predictable, Rachel finished. Later, when they returned to the cargo bay, Doc passed among the crew, seemingly offering comfort, but actually sharing specific instructions with key personnel. No one exchanged more than a few whispered words, but a plan was taking shape. That night, Doc lay awake, mentally reviewing every detail he had observed. The Vecnar's arrogance had made them careless. They monitored the officers constantly but paid little attention to the knowledge keepers they had dismissed as insignificant. As Doc watched a guard yawn at his post, he knew the aliens' greatest weakness wasn't in their biology or technology. It was their inability to see the threat right in front of them. The quiet scientist they had laughed at, who had spent his life observing, analyzing, and understanding the patterns that others missed. Tomorrow, those observations would become action. The 5th day of captivity began like the others. The Vecnar guards rounded up work details, distributing crew members to various tasks around the ship. Doc was assigned to clean the laboratory section again, exactly as he had hoped. In the science lab, Doc worked methodically, wiping down surfaces while discreetly studying the Vecnar technology. The guards paid little attention to the quiet scientist, occasionally barking orders but otherwise ignoring him. When the guards stepped outside to speak with their relief team, Doc moved quickly. From his hidden tablet, he transferred a chemical formula to a small piece of paper, then slid it into Engineer Kathy Brown's pocket as he passed her. "Lab storage, Section C, Shelf 4, he whispered. "Blue containers." She gave the barest nod and continued working. At midday meal, the crew gathered in the mess hall under guard. Doc took his usual spot, appearing no different than any other day. But subtle movements, a tap on the table, a specific way of holding his spoon, conveyed messages to those who had been instructed to watch for them. Maintenance worker Jeff Miller spilled his water, creating a distraction that allowed Doc to pass small packets of chemicals to 3 different crew members. No one spoke about the plan. No commands were given. Each person knew their specific task and nothing more. By afternoon, the pieces were in motion. In engineering, Paul Garcia accidentally dislodged a panel while cleaning, exposing access to the ship's ventilation systems. The guard yelled at him, but didn't realize the panel had been left slightly misaligned, creating an entry point for later. "Clumsy human," the guard hissed, showing off his sharp teeth. "Sorry," Garcia mumbled, appearing frightened while meeting Doc's eyes across the room with a quick, confirming glance. In the medical bay, Nurse Fowler was pretending to organize supplies while actually preparing the compound Doc had designed. The formula, based on his analysis of Vecnar biology, would create respiratory distress in the aliens without harming humans. At 1500 hours, the ship's lights flickered briefly. The signal that communications specialist Rachel Wilson had successfully accessed the backup communications system through a maintenance tunnel. The Vecnar noticed the flicker, but dismissed it as a symptom of their ongoing system integration. As the work crews were returned to the cargo bay, Doc stumbled again. His signature move now, bumping into a guard and slipping a small device from his pocket onto the alien's equipment belt. The guard shoved him away with disgust, never noticing the tracker now attached to him. Back in the cargo bay, Doc sat quietly in the corner, appearing to rest while actually monitoring his hidden tablet. The tracker showed the guard moving through the ship, mapping patrol routes and timing. Other crew members watched Doc's subtle hand signals, understanding the countdown had begun. At exactly 1745 hours, 15 minutes before the Vecnar's scheduled shift change, Doc made his move. He caught the eye of engineer Kathy Brown and nodded once. In response, Brown pressed a device she had assembled from spare parts against a ventilation grate. It emitted a frequency that disrupted the Vecnar's crystalline technology, causing a power fluctuation in Section 4. When the guards rushed to investigate, Rachel Wilson used the distraction to access a maintenance hatch, connecting jumper cables that Nurse Fowler had prepared earlier. The medical compound began flowing into the ventilation system, targeting areas with high Vecnar presence. Doc still hadn't spoken a word of command. His leadership consisted of nods, hand signals, and precisely timed movements. The crew followed his silent guidance with absolute trust. In the command center, the Vecnar began to notice something was wrong. Several guards coughed and rubbed their eyes. Alarms sounded as systems began failing in seemingly random patterns. The commander barked into his communicator, "Security check all sections. The humans are doing something." But it was too late. The compound had already affected half the Vecnar on board, and the crew's coordinated actions had disabled critical systems. The aliens' rigid command structure began to falter as confusion spread. Throughout the ship, crew members moved according to Doc's carefully orchestrated plan, each performing their specific task at the exact right moment, without a single spoken command from their unlikely leader. The silent takeover had begun. Chaos erupted throughout the U.S. horizon as the Vecnar struggled to respond to the simultaneous failures happening across the ship. The aliens' normally perfect coordination disintegrated as the respiratory compound took effect, leaving many guards coughing and disoriented. In the cargo bay, Doc finally broke his silence to give brief instructions. Now, he said quietly to the group gathered around him. Team 1, Secure Engineering. Team 2, Communications. Team 3, Free the officers. Crew members moved with purpose, retrieving hidden tools and makeshift weapons they had gradually assembled over the past 5 days. The 2 Vecnar guards in the cargo bay were already struggling to breathe, their scales taking on a bluish tint as the compound affected their respiratory systems. Engineer Paul Garcia led his team through the maintenance tunnels toward engineering. They encountered 3 Vecnar technicians who were too disoriented to put up much resistance. Within minutes, Garcia had accessed the main systems and begun the process of shutting down the crystalline technology that had disabled the ship. Doc's calculations were perfect. He muttered as the alien devices powered down. Frequency disruption is working exactly as he predicted. In the command center, the Vecnar commander struggled to understand what was happening. Reports flooded in from all sections, systems failing, guards incapacitated, humans seemingly appearing out of nowhere to take control of vital areas. How is this possible? He demanded, slamming his fist on the console. They are disarmed. Their leaders are contained. His second-in-command stared at the security feeds, watching as humans systematically reclaimed their ship. The workers, he said in sudden realization. The knowledge keepers we ignored. The commander's yellow eyes widened. The small scientist. The one we laughed at. Security footage shows him at the center of it all, the second-in-command confirmed. But he never gives orders. They just know what to do. The Vecnar commander straightened his massive frame, fighting against the growing tightness in his chest. Find him. Kill him. But it was already too late. Rachel Wilson and her team had reached the bridge, where they found Captain Maxwell and the other officers still bound with energy restraints. The guards outside had collapsed from the respiratory compound, allowing Wilson's team to enter unopposed. Captain, Wilson said as she deactivated Maxwell's restraints, the ship is being reclaimed section by section. Doc's plan is working. Maxwell rubbed her wrists, her expression a mixture of disbelief and admiration. Doc. Dr. Freeman is behind this. Yes, Mom. He's coordinated everything. The compound affecting the Vecnar, the system disruptions, the timing of our movements, all of it. Security Chief Mason, his face still bruised from Vecnar beatings, shook his head in amazement. The quiet scientist. The one they laughed at. The very same, Wilson confirmed with a smile. Captain Maxwell quickly took charge. We need to secure the ship completely before their reinforcements arrive. Where is Dr. Freeman now? Leading the team to secure the main weapons array. He calculated it would be the last place the Vecnar would expect an attack. Meanwhile, Doc moved silently through the corridors with his small team. They encountered a group of Vecnar soldiers who, despite their respiratory distress, still outnumbered and outmatched them physically. For a moment, it seemed Doc's team would be overwhelmed. Then Doc removed a small device from his pocket, a modified scanner that emitted a precise frequency. The Vecnar's weapons immediately powered down, their energy cores resonating with the disruptive frequency. The Vecnar commander arrived just in time to witness his soldiers being subdued by a crew led by the unassuming scientist he had dismissed days ago. You, he gasped, struggling to breathe. How? Doc didn't respond verbally. He simply adjusted his glasses and continued working to restore the ship's systems. The commander lunged forward in desperate rage, but collapsed before reaching Doc, the compound finally overwhelming his massive body. As the last of the Vecnar resistance crumbled, Captain Maxwell's voice came over the newly restored communication system. All sections report. One by one, crew members confirmed their areas secure. Doc simply nodded to himself as the plan he had meticulously crafted unfolded perfectly. A symphony he had conducted without words. The realization had come too late for the Vecnar. They had judged by appearance and missed the true threat, the quiet observer who had turned their own arrogance against them. 6 hours after the uprising began, the U.S. horizon was fully back under human control. The Vecnar had been contained in the shuttle bay, their respiratory distress treated just enough to keep them stable. Their warships remained in position outside, commanders demanding updates that never came. On the bridge, Captain Maxwell stood tall despite her exhaustion. Status report. All systems restored to 80% capacity. First Officer Porter replied. Engineering reports we can have weapons and shields at full power within 2 hours. The compound is breaking down naturally in the ventilation system, Nurse Fowler added. Air quality will be back to normal standards within the hour. Maxwell nodded, then turned to face the quiet figure standing near the science station. Doc Freeman looked much as he always had, rumpled lab coat, messy hair, eyes observant behind his glasses. Yet somehow he seemed different to everyone who looked at him now. Dr. Freeman, Maxwell said formally, I believe we owe you an explanation of how you managed to coordinate a ship-wide liberation with minimal communication and no official authority. The bridge fell silent as all eyes turned to Doc. He adjusted his glasses nervously. It was simple observation, Captain, he said softly. The Vecnar were predictable. They valued strength and dismissed what they perceived as weakness. So they never saw us as a threat, especially me. But how did you develop the compound so quickly? Mason asked, his previous dismissive attitude completely gone. I analyzed their biology during first contact, Doc explained. My scanner collected more data than they realized. When they threw us in the cargo bay, I already knew their respiratory vulnerabilities. And the coordination? Porter pressed. How did everyone know exactly what to do and when to do it? Doc almost smiled. Science is about patterns, communication, and precision. We didn't need many words. Just shared purpose and careful timing. The tactical officer interrupted. Captain, the Vecnar mothership is hailing us. On screen, Maxwell ordered. The view screen displayed a larger, more elaborately decorated Vecnar. His eyes widened slightly, seeing the humans in control of their own bridge. I am Supreme Commander Kexnar. What has happened to our boarding party? Explain immediately. Captain Maxwell stood firm. Your forces attempted to seize our vessel. We have reclaimed it. Your boarding party is alive but detained. The Supreme Commander's scales darkened with rage. Impossible. How could unarmed prisoners overcome our elite warriors? Maxwell glanced at Doc, then back to the screen. Perhaps your warriors should have paid more attention to our scientists. Release our forces immediately or face destruction. Before you make threats, Maxwell replied calmly, you should know that we've analyzed your weapon systems. Your ship's energy matrices share the same vulnerability as your portable weapons. Dr. Freeman. Doc stepped forward and pressed a sequence on the console. Immediately, the lights on the Vecnar ships dimmed. Their weapons powered down. A harmonic disruption pulse, Doc explained quietly. Temporary, but effective. The Supreme Commander stared in shock. You, the small one, they reported. The Knowledge Keeper. Doc simply nodded. After a long pause, the Supreme Commander's demeanor changed. Perhaps we have misjudged your species. I propose a discussion of terms. We're willing to negotiate, Maxwell agreed. But first, you'll acknowledge our sovereignty and right to travel peacefully. As the diplomatic conversation continued, Doc quietly stepped back from the console. His part was done. He turned to leave the bridge, his thoughts already returning to his research. Dr. Freeman, Captain Maxwell called, stopping him. Where are you going? Back to my lab, Captain. There's still much to study about the Vecnar biology. With their permission, of course. Maxwell smiled. I think we can arrange that. But first, she turned to face the entire bridge crew. Let the record show that Dr. Samuel Freeman's actions saved this ship and crew through scientific brilliance and leadership of the highest order. The bridge erupted in applause. Doc looked down, uncomfortable with the attention but unable to hide a small, satisfied smile. As he left the bridge, crew members he passed nodded with newfound respect. The Vecnar prisoners watched him with a mixture of fear and awe as he walked past their containment area. In the weeks that followed, the U.S. Horizon established a cautious peace with the Vecnar. The aliens insisted that the silent commander be present at all negotiations, having learned a valuable lesson about judging strength by appearance alone. Doc never changed his quiet ways. He still dropped equipment occasionally and stumbled over his words in casual conversation. But no one on the horizon ever underestimated him again. They had seen firsthand that true power often lies in silent observation, patient planning, and the courage to act when the moment is right. Some victories need no words at all.